The laughter echoed across the luxurious rooftop restaurant, sharp, cruel, and painfully out of place. Everyone had turned their heads toward the woman standing frozen near the table, her face pale under the soft city lights. Her name was Claire Winters, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country. A woman who had built an empire from scratch, who commanded rooms full of investors with ease, yet, in that single moment, she looked like a little girl again, wounded and humiliated. The man she had agreed to meet, a high-profile venture capitalist, had just leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know, Claire, I expected someone more fit to lead. Or to date, for that matter. Maybe focus less on profits and more on the treadmill." His friends snickered. The waiter looked away. And Claire, proud, accomplished, powerful Claire, swallowed her pain, turned, and walked out before anyone could see the tears breaking through her composure. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and that real worth isn't measured by appearances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this one remind us that sometimes, the most beautiful hearts are hidden behind scars the world refuses to see. Claire didn't cry in her car right away. She sat still, gripping the steering wheel, watching the lights of the city blur in the windshield. She'd spent years proving herself in boardrooms full of men who questioned her every decision, every choice. She'd worked nights that bled into mornings, sacrificed friends, love, and even her health for a company she built from nothing. But somehow, a few cruel words from a stranger cut deeper than all the challenges she had ever faced. Maybe because she'd heard those words before years ago, from classmates who made fun of her size, from relatives who told her she'd never be loved unless she lost weight. She had built her success on turning that pain into power. But that night, it felt like the armor she'd worn for so long had cracked. The next morning, the gossip had already spread online, a source leaking how the CEO meltdown ended a promising business dinner. Comments under the article ranged from pity to mockery. Claire's PR team told her to stay quiet, to focus on work, to let it fade. But it didn't. Every meeting, every event, she could feel the stares, the whispers disguised as politeness. For the first time in her career, she felt small, like her entire worth had been reduced to a number on a scale. Then, 2 weeks later, life threw her something unexpected. She was sitting alone in a small coffee shop on a rainy Sunday afternoon, wearing her usual gray hoodie, trying to disappear into the corner. She was reviewing contracts on her laptop when she noticed a little boy spilling hot chocolate all over his drawing. Before she could think, she grabbed a few napkins and rushed over to help. The boy, no older than 7, looked up with wide, teary eyes and said, "Thank you, miss. My dad says accidents don't make bad people." She smiled despite herself. And then she heard a voice, deep, warm, calm. "Ethan, what did I tell you about balancing your cup, bud?" The man walking toward them wasn't anyone she recognized, tall, wearing a worn leather jacket, a bit tired-looking, but with eyes full of genuine kindness. He thanked her, apologized for the mess, and smiled the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. They chatted briefly. His name was Daniel, a single father who worked as a school art teacher. Claire introduced herself, simply as Claire, not Claire Winters, CEO. He didn't seem to recognize her, and that was oddly comforting. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed again and again. At first by coincidence, the same coffee shop, the same quiet hours, and later, perhaps by quiet intention. Daniel had a calm energy that made the noise in her head fade away. He didn't talk about business or success. He talked about his son, his art, and the small joys that made his days meaningful. For the first time in a long while, Claire laughed, really laughed, over spilled lattes and silly sketches, but the past has a way of finding cracks to slip through. One morning, a photo of Claire and Daniel sitting together appeared online. Someone recognized her, and soon the comments returned, crueler than before. "Guess she found someone who doesn't mind a plus-size paycheck," one said. "Single dad looking for a sugar mama," said another. Within hours, Daniel's small art school received hateful messages. His co-workers whispered behind his back. Ethan came home crying because other kids teased him, saying his dad was dating the fat lady from the internet. Claire wanted to disappear again, convinced she had ruined his life just by being in it. She tried to distance herself, but Daniel showed up at her office one afternoon, holding nothing but a box of crayons and a drawing from Ethan. It was a picture of the three of them, standing under a rainbow. At the bottom, in uneven letters, it said, "Kind hearts win." Daniel told her that he wasn't ashamed, not of her, not of the gossip, not of how she looked. "You've spent your life proving yourself to people who don't deserve to be the judge," he said. "Let's prove them wrong, not with words, but with kindness." That night, Claire made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, she walked into her company's headquarters and announced a new initiative, a public campaign called Face of Strength, highlighting successful individuals who had faced body shaming, discrimination, or ridicule and still built remarkable lives. The campaign wasn't just about empowerment, it was raw, emotional, and deeply human. When the first video went live, featuring Claire herself, speaking candidly about her pain, her struggles, and the humiliating night on the rooftop, it went viral. Not because she was famous, but because she was honest. She didn't hide behind filters or corporate polish. She looked into the camera, voice trembling but steady, and said, "If being thin is the price for being accepted, then I'd rather be full of courage, of love, of the strength that comes from being unapologetically real." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people, men, women, teenagers, began sharing their own stories under the campaign's hashtag. The same media outlets that had mocked her now praised her bravery. Even the cruel investor who had humiliated her faced a backlash so fierce he was forced to issue a public apology. But Claire didn't care about revenge. She cared about the people who finally felt seen because she dared to be vulnerable. Through it all, Daniel and Ethan stood by her. They weren't her rescuers, they were reminders that love didn't require perfection, only presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Claire stood with them on that same rooftop where everything had broken weeks ago. This time, there were no cruel whispers, no judgmental eyes, just laughter, the kind that heals. Ethan ran around chasing bubbles, Daniel blew into the wind, and Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Months later, Claire was invited to speak at an international business conference. Her story had become a beacon for women leaders around the world. As she walked onto the stage, she wasn't the nervous, self-conscious woman she once was. She was radiant, powerful, and unafraid. She began her speech by saying, "They said I was too fat to lead. Too fat to be loved. Too fat to be seen as beautiful. But the truth is, I was never too much of anything. The world was simply too small to see me." By the time she finished, the audience was on their feet. And somewhere in the front row, Daniel held Ethan close, both of them beaming with pride. Claire had learned that sometimes, it takes one cruel moment to reveal the world's ugliness and one act of kindness to change it forever. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that real strength comes from kindness, and that everyone deserves to be loved for who they truly are, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us spread more stories that remind the world that compassion is still the most powerful force there is, because sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to stay silent and one single dad who stands up to change everything.